Good morning. They say you never forget your first time. And that's true. We got a first coming up right here. This is fun because as we're winging through these journals, I'm making my first lap around the country to see all these new places that I've never been. And one of those was Nashville, Tennessee. In October of 1996, we went and we did a main event, big real estate seminar in Nashville. And I got to hang out with a friend that I had met just a couple of months earlier, Mr. Mike Hardwick. And Mike is the founder of Churchill Mortgage, big mortgage company who built in collaboration with Dave Ramsey. It's the only mortgage company that Dave Ramsey recommends and has been for years. Well, Dave and Mike started out together. Mike was the one that was kind of the sponsor of the very first Dave Ramsey show, and they've built an amazing relationship. So that one of those things, as a sidebar, kind of shows you the value of long-term relationships. And when you meet people, and Mike has become one of my closest relationships. I've had amazing experiences all over the world with Mike. And this particular time we came into Nashville for a main event. Eben and I were both there, and Mike took us out for dinner. We went to a football game. It was the fall, so we went to a high school football game. We went to Macaroni Grill, and after dinner, Mike tells us, he says, "I'm going to take you for a treat." And we had never been to Krispy Kreme. This was before the big Krispy Kreme craze. They were mostly in the South. So Eben and I were both very excited, and we get in Mike's big, white Mercedes sedan, and we're driving through town, and we come up over the hill. I'll never forget the words, because Mike looks at it, he goes, "Boys, the hot light is on." And we were giddy, because we didn't even have any idea of what that meant, but it sounded like that was a good thing. So we pulled in, and I had my first Krispy Kreme donut. We ate a whole dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, hot off the line, between us, with chocolate milk. And it's one of my favorite memories of ever being in Nashville. It's such a vivid memory. And so Mike, thank you for that memory. It was fantastic. Now, at that same time, in that fall, one of the things that I got introduced to was the work of W. Edwards Deming. And Deming, if you don't know, was the guy who went over to Japan after the war and helped them rebuild and turned them into in the 80s, the most quality manufacturers in the world at the time. And he created all these principles around what he called Deming's principles of profound knowledge. And I see, as I'm looking through the journals here, how impactful that's been on me, just understanding these principle-based things of how to look at things from a scientific perspective. So I wrote down a few of these, and one of the things I first learned is that variation is in everything. And so we look at it and we start to see that everything is variable. I was really applying this to advertising outcomes. The two go hand in hand. Jay Abraham is a big Deming student and practitioner. So when you understand that variation is in everything, you can start to identify it. And of course, the goal is to drive out variation and make something stable and predictable. That's what we really want from our marketing, is we want certainty about things. And it's, I've evolved this into what we're looking for. We want our advertising to be a vending machine versus a slot machine. And a lot of this is rooted in the things that I learned about Deming here. So when we're looking at things, there's a difference between a stable system and an unstable system. So a stable system is that some of the variables, you've driven out the variables and you have some constants. So what the worst thing that can happen is that people will take an idea, they'll put a postcard together, they'll mail out the postcard, and they didn't get any response. And then they come to the conclusion that postcards don't work. Or they do something, they mail one postcard this month, and then they mail a completely different thing to a whole nother list next month, and they don't get the same result, or they do get the same result of nothing. And they think, oh, again, postcards don't work. Or they'll run a print ad and get no response. Or print ads don't work. But they've got to realize that when you drive out variation in something, you can improve a system, but it has to come from a place of stability. So I really started applying that to real estate in terms of thinking about what is stable around real estate. Like if we want to get listings, find people who want to sell their house and have them hire us to do it, then the stability comes in knowing that if we take a particular category of homes, let's say we take lakefront homes like we do right here in Winter Haven, we know that over the last 3 years, every year among the 2,000 2,100 lakefront homes in Winter Haven, that roughly 4 to 5% of them will sell every year. So that is a stable system. That means that out of those 2,100, that there will be 90 or 100 people that will sell their house in the next 12 months. If that is fixed and we stay there, those 2,100 people, what would be stable is mailing something to those 2,100 people every month instead of just randomly mailing out 2,000 postcards to wherever you're emotionally led to do. And it's a very interesting thing that you see why people do the things that they do when it comes to advertising. They kind of are chasing their emotional things. Maybe there was a sale of a particular type of home, and then you decide, oh, I'm going to run over here and chase that type of home. But all the wins come from identifying a stable system and applying something that you can create that's predictable. So that was the basis of everything that we've done with our Getting Listings program. It's very interesting because one of the things that Deming would do mostly worked with manufacturing processes, and he would do these workshops with companies, and he would have all of the management teams. Management theory was a big thing in the 80s and 90s of how do we drive quality, how do we drive results. And one of the things that they would do to prove this, everything is related to the system approach, is they would do what he called the experiment on red beads. And they would have these tubs filled with red and white beads, and the red beads would represent defects in the system. So most of the beads are white, but there are red beads in the system. And then they would go around, they would build teams of 5 people, 4 production plus a manager, and they would test the basic management theories of the day. And one of those was goals and exhortations. If everybody's aligned with the goal, and the goal is no defects, as long as everybody's clear on our objective, that should be fine. So they would take they would have a paddle that was like a Chinese checkers paddle with, you dip it in, and all the beads would kind of line up on the board, and then they would record the day's production. That was what happened when you loaded up your paddle, and you'd count how many red beads. But while it was going on, they got everybody around the bin chanting, "No red beads, no red beads." And then they'd write it down, and they would see that as they did more rounds, there was no production improvement. Nothing was changing except the people's attitudes. They weren't making a change in the actual system. And then they decided to test carrot and stick, goals, punishment and reward. So they did the same thing. They didn't change anything about the ratio of beads in the bin. And they would take the paddle, but now they were going to record, and the bottom person who got the worst production was going to be punished or docked, and the one who got the best production was going to be praised and rewarded. So they would go, and you would do it and dip it up and mark down the things, and Josh got the best result. He got the lowest number of defects, so everybody was, "Yay, Josh, be more like Josh. Everybody should do what Josh does." And then the next round, Josh would have the same approach. He would dip in his paddle and come out, and the next time he would be the worst. And so you realize it was nothing that Josh was doing. It was all the variation that was inherent in the system. So this sounds a little bit like how that gets applied is that when you try and drive out the variation in things, when I create a system, the reason, if we take Michael Gerber's concept of designing something that's going to be duplicated 5,000 times, then when you duplicate something identically, you're going to get very similar results. And it's where you start changing things that you end up with all of the variation. So I look at this as the very beginning of where my mind started thinking in terms of scientific advertising, and not getting caught up in the emotional thing of, well, I like red, or I prefer blue, or these are our logos, or these are our, this is our branding. All of that stuff is sort of emotional and not looking at driving successful, predictable results every time. So that was kind of the beginning of the scientific advertising approach rooted in Deming. And as we evolve here, I'll show you some of the outcomes, the systems that we were able to create using this kind of model.